you know? Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton, and that is none other than Steven Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. And that's your cue that it's an SEC After Dark. Steven, it's been too long, man. How you been?
Mike, I am doing great. It is so good to be talking with you and all of the cousins tonight. I missed all you guys last week. I did have one of those realizations, and I wrote down like SEC After Dark and realized the acronym for it is sad. There's no sadness here when we're doing SEC After Dark. By the way, I also just realized that 1 month from now, when we wake up, it will be time for college football. Week 0. Florida State and Georgia Tech kick things off over in Ireland, August 24th. So even more reason to get excited about this season. It's not that far away.
Oh, man, I didn't even realize, Steven, and just 1 month away. And I forgot to even ask you, but prior to we starting this, but have you got your hands on the video game yet?
Shame on me. I haven't yet. Coming soon, though. How about you? Did you have a chance to break it in yet?
I was the best player in the world when that game came out, or at least of my friend circle, certainly, the old game, but I'm the worst damn player I think that's ever played that game. I'm so awful at it. It's beyond sad how bad I am. Both the cousins are killing me on an annual basis as we play. So I hate the game. But maybe that's because I can't move the ball. I can't stop the ball. And I'm just pathetic.
Sounds like you're the Vanderbilt of it's last year's Vanderbilt. They'll be better this year, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Steven, why they're really here, though, they could go on and on to hear about me sucking. But Steven had another great idea for the show. We're going to talk the biggest trap games for every single SEC team. And quite frankly, a lot of these were a little bit tougher to come up with than others. Steven also has got us bowl projections for all SEC teams, and it's a little tricky this year with the playoff. There's going to be buys involved. There's going to be a lot involved with that, but we'll get into that at the tail end of the show. And I've also asked Steven to come up with a list. Doesn't have to be a specific number or anything, but I call him the college football encyclopedia for a reason, folks. He follows this better than anybody. So I'm really looking to get some insight into any possible non-conference games against the G5s. So we're talking big-time upsets. Not that Steven's predicting big-time upsets, but the games on the SEC calendar that we should circle as possibilities, if that makes sense. So we got a lot to get into, Steven.
Yeah, we do, man. This was the trap games was a tough exercise. I don't know how you view kind of the trap games, but I had a little criteria. I think maybe the good news is after putting together the group of 5 games, I think if you're an SEC fan sweating out potential upsets, I probably have some good news for you later on in the show. So, Ben, I'm curious, like, how did you put together your criteria for the trap games?
Well, I tried to look at it as the one team will be favored or higher ranked, whatever you want to call it, and potentially losing to a team that by the point spread, will be an underdog to win the game. And I heavily factored in scheduling. So you'll see a theme as we go team by team here, but you may have a huge game 2 weeks away, but you got to be worried about the one right before it or potentially the one right after it, if that makes sense. I really tried to hammer home games, Steven, that all these fans, as of today, have no doubt that their team is going to win, but they could be dead wrong.
I think timing is such a big part of the trap games. I think you kind of nailed the criteria I was kind of using, which is a game that we think they'll be favored in. And it's kind of whether you are looking ahead, maybe you're coming off a game that was, really physical, or just the timing of it not great. So I think, like you said, favorite, but also looking ahead at sort of the rivalry and also sort of look ahead spot, maybe something on the road after a tough home game too, kind of screams trap game for me.
And real quick, Stephen Cousin Shane's in the comments. He says, "Sorry, I'm late. Was busy stealing all of Mike's recruits." Yeah, so we're in an online dynasty, and I think that's what he's doing. He's targeting every single player I'm going after. But
sounds like you'll be using the transfer portal.
hopefully, all these guys want to go to San Diego State because that's who I picked. But all right, Steve. So until we get a donation, we're going to go in alphabetical order as we always do. Give us a donation of any kind. We'll kick your team up to the top of the list. So biggest trap games, Stephen. Let's throw up Alabama's schedule here for the upcoming season. And this is another one. This was difficult because this is mighty Alabama. Even if they take a big step back, they're not used to losing any games. So I mean, I'm not even considering ones like Georgia. That's crazy because that's an elite team. How can that be a trap game? At LSU, at Tennessee, I'm taking games like that off the table. Very curious to know, Stephen, where you're going with Alabama for their biggest trap game.
Mike, I considered 2 games as potential trap games for Alabama. I think, first of all, September 14th at Wisconsin. I think Alabama will be favored. Not too often we see an SEC team go up to Big Ten country. Wisconsin, kind of a team that's a little bit in transition. So I had that one circled, but I settled on November 23rd at Oklahoma. Talk about timing. A week before playing Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Just the timing of that one screams, don't overlook the Sooners on the road before you play one of your biggest rivals. So also, I should note too, I think Oklahoma by that point of the season will be much better. And I think you just kind of think about how Oklahoma could evolve. Like, how does the passing game? What about the receivers? Like, if Alabama's secondary is not, kind of solved or they're struggling there, Jackson Arnold and those receivers for Oklahoma could be really problematic that late in the year.
Right, and I should note, we should have mentioned this from the top, Stephen. Steven's not showing me his list, and I've not seen his list. So when he reveals it, he's revealing it to me as well. But great minds think alike, Steve, because that's exactly where I went for Alabama. Again, I'll throw up their schedule here. But November 23rd it is at Oklahoma, and you may be saying, well, how in the world is that a trap game? Again, we got high hopes for the Sooners, but who knows? Texas is going to be incredibly difficult. They beat Texas last year. Not saying they can't do it again this year, but everybody that listens to this show knows how high I am on Ole Miss and Missouri. They're going to be coming off road trips to those. So there is a shot here that I think Oklahoma may not be ranked. And maybe that's going too far, but just maybe on a little bit of a skid heading into Alabama. Everybody's going to be picking Alabama. But I think this could be the biggest home game, Stephen, on Oklahoma's radar. I know the Tennessee game, that'll certainly be one, but I think Alabama could be even bigger. And it's still, fair or not, I know Georgia fans will complain and say we're the standard, which I agree with. But a lot of people nationally, I think, will still look at Alabama as the standard in the way that if you beat Alabama, then you are one of the elite of the elite. And so for those reasons, I think Oklahoma is a trap game for Alabama. And another thing, Stephen, I'll throw up Alabama's schedule one more time. I think Alabama, assuming everything goes according to plan, we're going to be in the playoff race here, probably by that game. And this is a game, if you lose to Oklahoma, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Oklahoma because that's not the intention. But if Alabama loses to Oklahoma, it could knock them out of the playoff, which also, in my mind, makes it a trap game. Now, if Alabama's undefeated, clearly one loss isn't going to kill you. But I'm thinking maybe if they have lost to Georgia, if maybe they've lost to Tennessee, and then that third one. So I'm just saying if it's their third loss, could knock them out of the playoff. And who knows? They could be. I don't think they're going to be looking ahead necessarily to the Iron Bowl, but crazier things have happened.
I think that's a great point, Mike. I think just thinking about Alabama's schedule here, And I know not everything is about the playoff, but it is interesting to me when you see how that schedule breaks down starting on October 19th, like Tennessee, Missouri, at LSU, Mercer, and then at Oklahoma. Like that's a pretty season defining stretch. And then, of
Hmm.
course, the game against Auburn, and not trying to overlook the Georgia game, but they will be, your first 6 games. If Alabama is not 5-1 or 6-0 in that stretch, there's really something wrong with this team going into this year. I'll throw something out about Oklahoma. Mike, I don't know how you feel about this. September 21st, they get Tennessee. November 23rd, they get Alabama. What's the odds that they pull off an upset in one of those games?
In Tennessee or Alabama, you're saying?
Yeah, either one.
I think it's I think it's very high. I mean, I honestly I would probably favor Oklahoma by the slimmest of margins to beat Tennessee right now.
Interesting. I would go with very high.
Hmm.
I think Oklahoma will get somebody this year that we don't anticipate. Maybe that's Texas. Maybe that's Missouri, Alabama, Tennessee at home. Like I said earlier, too, I think if you want to, Oklahoma is going to get better over the course of the season. So they do have a lot of tough games in November, but by then you give Jackson Arnold 8-9 games to get acclimated, and you give the offensive line that much time to gel. This will be a better team by November.
Hmm. Steven, first donation from Michael Raleigh. Let's throw up a little. It's been a while since I've done this. Thank you, Michael. Can't be a trap game if you are an underdog in every game. Cough, cough, Florida and Vandy. He's a big Florida fan, so let's do Florida next, Steven. I'll throw up a schedule, but good point there. But I think I have picked out a really good trap game for the Gators. I'm curious to know where you're going.
Mike, I am staying in September and going to take Mississippi State on
Hmm.
September 21st. I think just the way the schedule breaks down for Florida, you have 2 massive showdowns at home, Miami and Texas A&M. Not only are they massive showdowns, they're huge swing games for Florida this year and trying to get to a bowl game. So I think if you're Florida, you go through that schedule, you're 3-0, you hit the road for the first time, you're going to Starkville. Mississippi State, kind of like Oklahoma, I think is going to get better over the course of the season. And if Florida's defense is not any better, can you imagine like Jeff Lebby sitting here after having a couple games to warm this offense up with Blake Shapen and seeing that these guys gave up a lot of big plays in the secondary last year. Let's go after them again. So I'll go with September 21st at Mississippi State.
And Steven, I've been as high on Florida Gators as anybody this offseason. But wouldn't it be the most Billy Napier thing ever to come out, get some momentum, beat Miami, beat A&M, all is right in the world, and then we lose to Mississippi State? Come on. So that is my trap game as well. And to Michael Raleigh's point, it's difficult to be a trap game because there's I mean, heck, the second half of the season there's not an option. We all know Miami, maybe the biggest pressure point game of all of college football. Similar vibes, I think, for that A&M game. I don't think there's any pressure on Florida going into Tennessee because they own the Vols. The only other one I really considered maybe Kentucky, but given the fact you lost to them 3 years in a row, how in the world can that be a trap game? So Mississippi State, I'm seeing some UCF in the comments, Stephen, but I don't know. I think they're going to crush UCF. I don't think that'll be much of a ball game. But the one that is a trap game for me is Mississippi State.
Kentucky's interesting because of the timing of it. It's kind of sandwiched between the Tennessee and the Georgia games. But I think given the way that series has trended, it doesn't really seem like a trap game to me. I do think UCF is kind of at an interesting spot because that comes before the trip to Tennessee, Kentucky, and then Georgia, kind of another critical stretch for the Gators. I think UCF's going to be solid this year. They're picked from anywhere from probably 6th through 10th in the Big 12. Not a lot of separation there. Really good offense, questionable defense. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored when Florida and UCF meet up later this year. Florida does have a bye week before that game. So if there's any kind of, you get through that stretch if you're Florida, playing Miami, playing A&M, the road trip to Starkville, October 5th. You get a little bit of a break in there between that one. But certainly, I think UCF is dangerous, but I like Florida to win that game if I had to pick right now.
Yeah, and I will share this too, Stephen. At media days, basically everybody that I know that ran into Jeff Lebby and had an interaction with him, great guy, rooting for him. They're in for a bad year. I mean, that was consensus. Everybody spoke to, and again, you want your coach to be a good guy, but usually when they that's like what they say about Sam Pittman too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good guy. That's usually a nice way of saying I don't think it's going to work out for him.
Yeah.
Now he hadn't even coached the game, so that's not fair. But it struck me how everybody said the same thing about Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State at media days.
Mike, if you're returning 2 starters and you have significant offensive line turnover, a new starting quarterback in a new scheme, kind of screams year 0, doesn't it? It may take a year for this to get off the ground for Jeff Lebby.
Yep. All right. How about migrating coconuts? Appreciate you, brother. UMass is a trap game. Go MIZ. So let's do Missouri next, Stephen. Here's their schedule. Do you agree with that? Is UMass the trap game for Missouri?
I don't think UMass is a trap game. I will say if UMass beats Missouri, there's trouble because UMass is one of the probably bottom 15 teams in college football this year. I have November 16th against South Carolina, the Columbia Bowl, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I think just kind of looking at where this game falls for Missouri, there's the renewal of Oklahoma rivalry on November 9th. You also have Alabama on the 26th, like a critical 2-game stretch for Missouri. Then you turn around and play South Carolina on the 16th. Should note, Eli Drinkowitz is 5-0 against South Carolina all time, counting one of those at Appalachian State. So I just think the road trip to South Carolina late in the year, Shane Beamer, his teams get better by November. That could be a tricky spot for Missouri.
Stephen, I'm starting to wonder maybe we should have exchanged lists so we don't pick the same game every time. But that is exactly where I'm going for all the points you just mentioned. But I mean, that's a game that fans are just completely overlooking on the schedule when we talk about how easy it is. Columbia can get wild. Let's say you do beat Oklahoma, and heck, even throw Alabama in there. I mean, you're going to be on such a cloud 9, but really that Oklahoma game with these fans, I think they're so looking forward to it. It may be tough to get up for South Carolina in a tricky environment. Shane Beamer could be coaching for his job at that point in time, or who knows, Stephen, this could be a matchup where if South Carolina wins it, I mean, they'll have just played Vanderbilt. Let's assume they win that one. They could win this Missouri one that they're going to beat Wofford. I mean, this is how they punch their ticket to the postseason. So this could be a critical game for South Carolina, and that's a big reason why I picked it for Missouri.
Did you consider November 23rd at Mississippi State at all? I know we've kind of talked about how difficult year 1 is going to be for Jeff Lebby, but let's just say Missouri does well during that stretch, like at Alabama, the game against Oklahoma. They survived the road trip to South Carolina. Starkville, I know Mississippi State will be looking ahead to the Ole Miss game, but what if Mississippi State is 3-7 at that point with no win in SEC play, or however you want to break the record down? I mean, that kind of could be dangerous too. Mississippi State team with nothing to lose late in the year after a tough road trip to Columbia.
I'll be honest with you, Stephen. I considered Vanderbilt more than I considered Mississippi State, but solely for the fact, not that I think Vanderbilt's better than Mississippi State, but again, if you just look at Missouri's schedule, I mean, the first 3 weeks is kind of a joke. They will not have been tested. Will that hurt you against Vanderbilt? More than likely not, but I don't know. I think you may learn some things about yourself if Diego Pavia is as good as advertised, if Vanderbilt has found an offensive identity, if Clark Lee taking over the defense helps take that unit forward. That's a lot of ifs. But no, to answer your question, I considered Vanderbilt more than I did Mississippi State. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair point. But the first SEC game of the year for Vanderbilt after playing 3 games that they should win. Yeah, I could see that.
And to JP's point, I mean, Vanderbilt has played Missouri
Yeah.
fairly tight in recent seasons as well. Not that that necessarily means anything, but I think what it means is Missouri doesn't get up for that game is what it really means.
I think I was looking at Vanderbilt's schedule. They get Virginia Tech in the season opener, and I think we'll learn a lot about Vanderbilt in that game. But September 7th, Alcorn State, and September 14th against Georgia State. Vanderbilt, they're gonna be an interesting team to evaluate because of all the change and all the turnover, and they're going to be a team in transition. But they might make some big jumps too from game 1 to game 4 because they're fitting all these new pieces together. So I think maybe that kind of furthers your point a little bit on why Vanderbilt could maybe be a trap game for Missouri.
Right. And since we're just looking at it now, Stephen, we may as well knock Vanderbilt off the list. That's I mean, this is where we're at with Vanderbilt, Steve. I mean, this I'm not even like trying to kid or mock or anything like that, but I think the trap game is Alcorn. Where would you go for Vanderbilt?
I would actually go 1 week later and pick Georgia State.
Mm-hmm.
I think, first of all, Georgia State's a team that has a lot of transition this year. Del McGee is the new head coach, former Georgia assistant. By the way, old SEC friend Jim Chaney is their offensive coordinator at Georgia State. It's one of those, Georgia State plays in kind of they play in the old Atlanta Braves stadium at Turner Field. So it's kind of an interesting environment there. Third week of the season, Vanderbilt's probably not going to be at full, kind of full strength as they're sort of evolving. So I went with the Georgia State game as a trap game for Vanderbilt.
Early leader, Stephen, for comment of the night. Michael Raleigh. If Vanderbilt beats Virginia Tech, the ACC will abolish their league, as they should.
Sounds like that's what Florida State's rooting for, right?
All right. How about going back to alphabetical until we get a donation? How about Arkansas, Stephen? Where's the trap game for the Razorbacks this fall?
Mike, I think it's kind of hard to find one for Arkansas because I thought the way the schedule broke down.
Yeah.
But I think just thinking about getting to 6 victories, I think that game against Mississippi State on October 26th, not only is it a must-win game, but it really screams like trap game for me because Arkansas would have played A&M, Tennessee, LSU. You go on the road to Mississippi State. We saw what happened in this game last year. I just think that game is not only must win, but considering the schedule and maybe the toll it might take on Arkansas, that might be kind of tricky for this team. And by the way, Arkansas schedule, just now looking at it, October 5th to November 23rd, they have one road game, and that's at Mississippi State.
All right. And this was another tricky one, Stephen, because again, I mean, you almost want to flip it and say, where's the trap game where they could sneak up and beat somebody? But that's not what we're doing here for each individual team. I think, and I mean, you would know a lot more about this team than I would, Steven. So maybe you let me know how good of a pick this is. But I went with UAB because, I'm not rooting for this to happen. But if they lose to Oklahoma State, we saw what Auburn has done to them last year, just completely demolished them. I mean, the season could go off the rails in a hurry. And I was really left with UAB or Louisiana Tech. And I don't feel that Tech is a good option because it's the second last game of the season. And if Tech's beating them, it's because they've kind of quit. It's not because they're looking ahead to Missouri, at least not in my opinion. So I'm going with UAB. I think that is a trap game where they've got to show up, take care of business. They should kill UAB, but if sometimes you let one loss linger into 2. I hope that doesn't happen.
I think that's an interesting pick, Mike. I think a little bit about UAB. First of all, Trent Dilfer's the head coach at UAB, and they weren't very good last year. They were kind of a team, to use the term we've used. They were a team in transition. I think what's scary about them is they have one of the American Athletic Conference's better quarterbacks in Jacob Zeno, and they've got good skill talent. So they really can't stop anybody on defense, but they can also score. And I think that would kind of worry you is they have a quarterback that's capable of going into this environment and moving the ball and keeping this competitive, and especially with the way that it falls. The road trip to Oklahoma State the week before, kind of, I think, a must win, must play well for Sam Pittman, certainly to build some confidence here. And then you start the SEC play a week after on September 21st. And especially, too, if you're Arkansas, I think they will be improved this year. But it's also one of those cases that where they are, you can't really overlook anyone if you want to get to that 6 wins mark. So don't overlook UAB. They have the type of quarterback and offense that could keep this one close.
Steven, did you happen to see what Trent Dilfer said? I guess it was whatever conference they're at their media days. I think it was today.
I didn't see him today. The American Athletic Conference is having its media days the last couple. Yeah.
I think they went 4-8 last year. Because his quote was, "Where I come from, 4-8 coaches usually don't come back." He's like, "But I'm the exception here." So, case in point, yeah, not very good last year, but good for at least for a quote. You know what?
Yeah. Also, by the way, kind of a little tidbit. Alex Mortensen is their offensive coordinator. You may remember him. He was Alabama's off-field role. Did a very nice job last year as UAB's offensive coordinator. So maybe somebody down the road who might be up in for SEC jobs for coordinator, play calling, kind of assistant duties there.
We got another donation from Cousin William. He's a Kentucky fan, I believe. Ohio should get blown out, but I'll call him a trap game against Kentucky after a brawl fight with Georgia. Then looking ahead to Ole Miss. So how about it, Steven? Where are you going for the Kentucky Wildcats? Where's their trap game?
I had Ohio on my list. It's actually second to this pick. I'm going with October 12th. I'm going with Vanderbilt. And it's largely because of where that game falls in the schedule. They get Ole Miss, and then they get an off week, Vanderbilt, and then the trip to Florida. The way that this kind of schedule breaks down, I think that's kind of a good spot for maybe Kentucky to have a letdown off an off week. We saw Vanderbilt won in Lexington 2 years ago. So I just, looking at Kentucky's schedule, I think either Ohio or Vanderbilt stands out. Ohio, a ton of turnover from a very good team last year. Getting them early is probably a good thing for Kentucky, but I went with Vanderbilt.
Yeah. That's where I went as well, Steven. I just didn't really feel there was many good options, many difficult road games. Certainly wasn't going to go Murray State or even Southern Miss. I kind of considered, but it's week 1. It's very difficult. Now, there's a difference between starting slow and being a trap. So I kind of tossed Southern Miss out, and really the only options I thought on the board for me were Vanderbilt and Auburn. Because I believe, I'll throw up Auburn here. See, Auburn could be coming off loss to Georgia, loss to Missouri, and if things really go wrong, a loss to Oklahoma as well. I don't think that's unreasonable. So could that be a trap game? Potentially for Kentucky. But I also think that's a critical game for Kentucky to exceed expectations. You got to take care of the home games. You're probably not going to get Georgia. So certainly the rest of them, you really need to win if you're going to have a better than average season. So I kind of took Auburn off the table too. But that Vanderbilt one, Steven, I mean, I've been telling people I think Mark Stoops may be on a hotter seat than people realize. It's going to be scorching hot if they lose to Vanderbilt this year.
Yeah, absolutely. But to make it 2 in a row in Lexington for Vanderbilt, the timing of that game, for Kentucky, you mentioned the Auburn matchup coming between Florida and Tennessee. Those are both road games. Getting Auburn at home, certainly getting them at home, I think is a huge advantage to Kentucky. But if you wanted to make the case for Auburn, to me, it falls between those 2 huge road games, including a rivalry game against Tennessee and a Florida series that you've kind of controlled recently.
Yeah, and credit the Kentucky Sports Radio guys, Adam Luckett, Nick Roush. Again, I'll probably butcher this because my memory's shot these days, but I think Kentucky is 2-6 in their last 8 SEC home games. So what is it's not a bad home field advantage by any means. But with this schedule, if you're going 2-6, well, I mean you can't have that many, but if you go 1-3 in SEC home games, you are have a disaster year because you may go 1-7. I mean, it'll be that bad. You have to take care of the home games this year if you're Kentucky. Bottom line.
Especially when you get two swing games in SEC play, Auburn and South Carolina at home, not to mention Louisville. You're a rivalry game November 30th at home in Lexington. So that's kind of, I mean, if you look at Kentucky's schedule, if that holds up this year, then they're going to be hitting the under that 6.5. But that home schedule this year really gives Kentucky kind of, Mike, like you and I have talked about, they have a path to exceed kind of expectations if they can win those swing home games, because those road tests are going to be tough, and you have to assume that beating Georgia on September 14th, while Kentucky has played them well at times in Lexington, I think that's a pretty heavy ask for Kentucky this year to beat Georgia.
All right, how about Auburn, Stephen? Where are you going for Auburn's biggest trap game on the year?
I mentioned this at the start. Timing is everything, and that's why November 23rd against Texas A&M is my trap game for Auburn. I think it's very much a swing game overall. Could be a toss-up as far as who's favored by that point of the season, but it's a week before Alabama, and that's kind of why this is the trap game for me. I looked at maybe the Arkansas game on September 21st to wasn't a ton of glaring candidates here, so I settled on the Aggies on November 23rd.
Well, everybody that listens to this show knows what a big fan I am of Hugh Freeze and his massive underperforming games here. So, what is the one, Stephen? I mean, heck, he has about one or two a year that he shouldn't drop. I see a chief one here. We've talked about it before, I believe. I'm going Vanderbilt. Come on, Vanderbilt Commodores, November 2nd. That is the trap game for Auburn because again, there's a very realistic shot that they're on somewhat of a losing skid. They could beat Kentucky. That's a coin toss type game. I would slightly favor Kentucky because it's in Lexington, but who knows? I could just imagine them pulling some upsets, beating Missouri, beating Kentucky, then turn around and losing to Vanderbilt because that's what Hugh Freeze does, Stephen.
I think if you're making the argument for that to be a trap game, I'm also at the same time getting back to last season when they lost to New Mexico State and were pounded by Maryland in the Music City Bowl. So, late season games, and especially ones after maybe they exceed expectations and beat Kentucky, and you have some huge matchups still ahead with A&M and Alabama. Makes perfect sense, Mike. Good call.
All right, how about Georgia, Stephen? This was a tough one because the schedule is so daunting. Not a lot of games I would list as a trap game, but I think I found a good one. How about you?
Mike, I struggled with this one. I had a hard time finding one that I felt good about. You may call me crazy. I'm going to go with November 2nd against Florida. I know this series has been one-sided since 2020 when Florida won. This game comes between the Texas game on October 19th, and you have the Ole Miss game a week after. So maybe it's a case of Georgia is just so high after beating Texas and looking ahead to Ole Miss that they sort of overlook Florida, considering the way the series has gone. I'm stretching here because it was that, or make an argument for Georgia Tech in the season finale a week before the SEC championship game. If Georgia's in it, that's the only two I can really come up with.
No consideration whatsoever to Clemson in the opener?
A little bit. I just think that these two teams are kind of on different, tiers this year. But to your point, maybe Georgia, that's part of the problem. Georgia may overlook Clemson. I'm also having flashbacks of Georgia just demolishing Oregon a few years ago in that season opener. So,
yeah, Georgia will be looking ahead to the playoff. Maybe that's how they get them. But
yeah.
How about this selection, Steven? This again, I know I just bashed them relentlessly. October 5th, Auburn be coming off the Alabama game. If Georgia goes into Tuscaloosa, takes care of business, which they're currently favored to do, no guarantee that they actually beat Alabama. But if they do, riding high, we're going to another playoff. We're going to win it all. turn around and lose to Hugh Freeze. Come on. That right there, I think, is the trap game, Auburn, for Georgia.
It sounds like you're going to predict the highs and the lows for Hugh Freeze this year, right? To be a win over Georgia and a loss to Vanderbilt. That would make perfect sense based upon what we saw last season. A good chance that Auburn is 5-0 going into that matchup with Oklahoma and Arkansas coming to Auburn. And so I think if you're Auburn, it's certainly going to be a heavy lift to go into Athens and win, but they played well last year. So that ought to give Auburn some confidence. Not to mention, if you're undefeated by that point of the season, that's going to add to the stakes of this rivalry. So interesting pick there, Mike. I think I follow the logic there.
Yeah. Well, it's not often I get accused of using logic, so I'll take that one, Stephen. How about LSU? Where's the trap game here? I see a couple candidates for the Tigers.
Yeah, I do too. I like October 19th at Arkansas. Just the way the timing of this game kind of falls into the favor of Arkansas. You have Ole Miss on October 12th. You have at Texas A&M on October 26th. And not to mention, you still have the Alabama game coming up on November 9th. So I went with Arkansas because I still think at that point of the season, there is a chance that for Arkansas, the coaching staff, the situation there, maybe it looks a little different, but still, maybe by midseason, if Sam Pittman can keep his job, they're fighting hard. Arkansas is a tough out in Fayetteville. That's why I'm going October 19th.
Mm-hmm. Breaking news here, Steven. We got to cut it because we got Cousin Rick came in with a $50 donation. Appreciate you, Cousin Rick.
Thanks, cuz.
Aggies will spend the season setting traps and collecting skins. I love to see it, Rick. So we'll return to LSU, but let's do A&M, Stephen. And they're another one. It was a little tricky because we got a lot of home games, a lot of big time games here. But for Texas A&M, I think I have a really good one. I'm curious to know where you're going for Cousin Rick.
Mike, I hope I don't give Rick any bad flashbacks here. But I remember a game in the second half of a season at South Carolina. Now, there is a little bit of a difference. There's Mike Elko versus Jimbo Fisher, so Mike Elko can't mismanage a game. I'm going November 2nd at South Carolina. Texas A&M plays LSU the week before to go on the road to South Carolina in November. I think could be tricky for some of the reasons, we've talked about. I think Lenora Sellers by November is going to be settled in. Also, we've seen Shane Beamer's teams get better. Also, it's going to be a night game. So South Carolina, Williams-Brice at night seems like a very difficult spot for Texas A&M after playing LSU.
Yeah, hey, actually, Stephen, I love that pick. I probably like it better than the one I went with, but I don't know about you, but when I was going through this list, I kept picking South Carolina for a lot of people.
I did too. Yeah.
And I don't know if that just means, I'm low on them, as a lot of people are. So I didn't want to just keep picking the same one. So I would want a slightly different. How about this one, Stephen? October 19th, Mississippi State. I know I've bashed them. I hope I'm dead wrong. I love Mississippi State fans. They're some of the best in the country. But the way I'm kind of looking at it, Stephen, I mean, let's call it what it is. I believe Mississippi State's got a winning record over A&M since they joined the SEC. That doesn't necessarily mean anything for this year, but just speaks to the point that it's in Davis Wade. That's an incredibly difficult place to play. And look at what A&M has to do. Arkansas, Missouri, and LSU are the bookends of that Mississippi State sandwich. So trying to find a trap game. I think I got one in Mississippi State. And again, I'm a big believer in Mike Elko. I think that he'll have the defense rolling by this time, but he may not. And if Texas A&M struggles, it may be because they're not able to manufacture a ton of points this season. Again, that's a big if. But if that is the case, and what is Mississippi State going to be able to do, if nothing else, score points? So I'm just trying to identify games where Mississippi State can outscore the opponent. And I think Texas A&M's that one for me.
I like that call because the timing of that matchup and trip to Starkville, after playing Arkansas, Missouri, and then looking ahead to LSU, which could be a top 10 to 12 team in the country at that point. So A&M's schedule really breaks down favorably. I mean, the road trips, even the trip to Auburn, the fact that that game comes a week before Auburn's going to play Alabama. I know A&M's going to be looking ahead to the Texas game. There's some tricky spots there for A&M, but I think the challenge, I think, for all these teams when they go to Mississippi State or maybe South Carolina this year, or even Arkansas, these teams, I think every team's going to look at the preseason predictions and they're going to see them picked at the bottom. But if they're struggling and you go on the road in the SEC to some of these environments and have a letdown or a sluggish performance, I mean, it wouldn't take much for a Mississippi State, a South Carolina, and Arkansas to pick off one of these teams in one of these, I guess, our trap games.
Right. Cousin Rick says he would have picked Mississippi State, so I feel validated. Thank you, Cousin Rick. And Cousin Robert says Stanksville will be empty stadium this year. So I'm guessing he's an Ole Miss fan. I don't know, but we can move on from that. All right, back to LSU. Stephen, you already went with them, and I think you absolutely nailed it. It's Arkansas for me. Battle for the boot there. This is – I love these rivalry games that like one side doesn't even recognize as a rivalry. So I tend to favor the side that does consider it a rivalry for whatever reason. And that's certainly the case here, sandwiched between Ole Miss and A&M and Alabama, and heck, throw Florida into the mix as well. But I think that's one where LSU fans just automatically chalk up to an easy W. But as bad as Arkansas was last year, they nearly beat LSU. And I was in Tiger Stadium too. So if Arkansas can take those strides that I think they can, this is a winnable game for the Hogs here, October 19th. And these are the games I think LSU's really got to be concerned about. I think there's going to be a couple like this for the Tigers this fall.
Also, the matchup in 2022 was that 13-10 game in Fayetteville. I think that was Harold Perkins had a huge day. I'm trying to remember the sequencing of that season for LSU. But I think in general, Fayetteville's kind of like Mississippi State with Starkville. It is a hard place to play. And I think we'll have to see kind of how Arkansas's coaching situation, how this team stays alive this year is going to kind of play a huge role in shaping some of these games. But I think, Mike, to your point, if I'm Arkansas and I'm looking forward to this rivalry game and LSU doesn't take it seriously and we get them in Fayetteville, you can bet on October 19th, we're going to be ready for them.
And those are the type of games that if your coach is on the hot seat, that's how you get them off right there is winning a rivalry type game. All right. How about Ole Miss, Steven? Where you go? Where's the biggest trap game for the Rebels here?
Mike, I hate to go back to the well here, but how about November 2nd against Arkansas?
Yeah.
Just the timing of this game, again, is kind of playing a role here because if you're Ole Miss, you get Oklahoma the week before. After that, you get Georgia at Florida. So you're looking ahead to that big showdown against Georgia that we know what happened last year where Ole Miss was dominated. Lane Kiffin said, hey, we got to go get more talent. They did that. Now they get to look forward to that game, but also at the same time, you don't want to overlook Arkansas. And we've seen, too, trips to Fayetteville have been difficult for Ole Miss at times as well.
Yeah, when you said you were going back to the well, Stephen, I thought you were going with South Carolina again. But no, you nailed it. Yeah. This is Arkansas for me. As the listeners love to point out, Lane Kiffin's never won in Fayetteville. It's always, heck, I do it too, so I'm just as guilty, Stephen. But it's funny how we cling to these things in the off season. One was like, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was like Nick Saban has never won in Columbia, South Carolina, because Spurrier beat him at one time, right? So
Steven Garcia game, right?
Right. And then they go to South Carolina like a year or two ago. They beat him by 50. That means nothing. But again, we cling to it. I'm as guilty as anybody. But that right there, you said it best. LSU, Oklahoma, before the game, Georgia and Florida at the tail end. This is perfectly aligned for Arkansas to cause some mayhem here for this matchup in a game that is always seemingly so weird between Arkansas and Ole Miss. And Arkansas will be coming off the Mississippi State game. There's a chance they have some momentum here. Give me Arkansas, I think, is the easy answer. Biggest trap game on the Ole Miss schedule.
Did you consider November 23rd at Florida at all for this?
I certainly did.
Yeah.
And because I don't think that's a layup that a lot of people are assuming that it is. I'm just a little concerned about where Florida will be at that point in time. Will Billy Napier even be the coach? I mean, I'm on record, Stephen. I think Florida can beat LSU. I think I've actually predicted that. So if I'm going that far, I have to say that Billy Napier's still the coach. That's probably our 7th win of the season, something like that. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a big game, and that'll determine whether Ole Miss goes to the playoff or not.
I mean, the timing, not to keep going back to timing, but I mean, the way that sets up where you play Georgia off week at Florida, you'd love to have the off week after playing Georgia, but going on the road before playing in the Egg Bowl just like screams like trap game. Don't overlook Florida. Regardless of what the record is, going to Gainesville is not going to be easy by any means for Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm. Arkansas is everybody's trap game, says Bobby. The Razorbacks are in the playoff.
I actually thought that said Bobby P. I thought that was Petrino. Oh, sorry.
He's in the comments probably. He's on his motorcycle.
That's,
all right,
leave that for Dan Enos to reply to us.
All right, how about State, Stephen? They're a popular pick to be a trap game, but where is State's trap game?
Mike, it's hard to find kind of a trap game for Mississippi State just because of kind of where the expectation level is this year. But I think if Mississippi State wants to have any shot at going to a bowl game, you got to avoid kind of an upset loss. And so I settled on September 14th against Toledo. This is a Toledo team that will be picked near the top of the MAC by most people. They do have some turnover. They have a new starting quarterback. I think just around 8 or 9 returning starters, depending on where you look. But that game falls a week after September 7th at Arizona State, another swing game. So I hesitate to. This is a tough one. I think Mississippi State will survive here, but Toledo, the MAC, they've been giant killers before. Don't overlook Toledo, I guess is what I would say if you want to go to a bowl game in Mississippi State.
Stephen, I don't say it enough. You are a dang genius. Toledo is the answer. Everything you just said. But I mean, how many times is State going to be, favored? Yeah, it's tough, slim pickings out here. So, yeah, I think Toledo certainly is the answer. If we can go 3-0, we might have something cooking down here. But again, I could see a scenario year one of a new coach, new schemes, new players. All that's been said to death. But I could realistically see a scenario where you beat Arizona State, you turn around, you lose to Toledo. I mean, that can happen in major college football. So Toledo is the answer. That's a huge trap game, I think, for State.
I think for Mississippi State, I think just any of those games, whether it's Arizona State or Toledo or Arkansas, like the swing games, even if they're favored, they're probably not at the place where they can be good enough to be overlooking anybody and overcome kind of a short, kind of sluggish performance given all the questions with this team. So to me, the path for Mississippi State getting to a bowl game, it starts by going 3-0. So they got to have that Toledo one.
All right, Stephen, we've talked some Oklahoma, but we've not yet identified their trap game. Where are you going for the Sooners?
I am going September 28th at Auburn. Oklahoma gets 4 home games to start the season. There's the huge showdown on September 21st against Josh Heupel and Tennessee. Then, of course, October 12th, playing the rivalry game against Texas. So Oklahoma does have an off week between Auburn and Texas, but I think SEC road opener, looking ahead a little bit maybe to Texas, this is a tricky spot for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Stephen. I did consider South Carolina. Again, South Carolina is everybody's trap game apparently, but for all the reasons you said, I love that Auburn pick, Stephen. I know it's on the plains and all this, but again, I'll throw this up there too. And this is not entirely fair, Stephen, but home field records the last 5 seasons. I realize the Harsin era, Hugh Freeze just getting it going here, but Um, I mean, in a 16 team league here, if you want to count Oklahoma and Texas, which fairly you could say let's take them out of it, we are still what 12th best home field advantage Auburn has had in the last 5 seasons. So again, I get it. There's big time moments in Jordan Hare, and it's got a mystique and all that, but it has that mystique for the big time games. And fair or not, I don't know if Oklahoma is going to be a huge game for those fans. I think it will be for Oklahoma certainly, but I'm kind of talking myself out of the trap game here. But yeah, I think Oklahoma will be undefeated, and this is I think the game on Auburn's schedule that is the most critical because you cannot have a loss going into that road gauntlet. I just don't think you can because I think it's going to be very tough to win the majority of these football games. So you got to go into it undefeated if possible. So it's a lot on the line for Auburn here.
I also think for Oklahoma, that September 14th game against Tulane before playing Tennessee, Tulane has a lot of turnover from last season, but a very good coach in John Summerall, who comes over after being incredibly successful at Troy. Tulane's got some questions, but they're also, I think, good enough on defense to where they could cause Oklahoma some trouble early in the year. So I think it's one of those two games in September. I think it's either Tulane or Auburn. Considered South Carolina, but also I think with that game just being at home, if it was at Williams-Brice, maybe it's a little bit higher on my list.
Well, speaking of the Gamecocks, Stephen, where are we going for the trap game for Shane Beamer and company?
I'm going November 9th against Vanderbilt. I hate to go against my criteria from earlier and saying that South Carolina is going to get better and Lenora Sellers is going to take a big step forward by November. But if you're South Carolina, you can't afford to lose or overlook Vanderbilt because of the difficulty of the schedule. Vanderbilt also probably their best chance to get a win in SEC play. So I went with November 9th against Vanderbilt for South Carolina.
Stephen, feel free to call me crazy. It's about all they do in the comments anyway. But Shane says, got to be Clemson, right? I'm not that crazy, but not far off from it. Stephen, I'm going, and this is going to sound absurd, but I'm going Wofford, November 23rd. These are the type of games where you get your coach run off. And again, I'm not on the Cousin Shane bandwagon. Get rid of Shane Beamer. I can't believe we have Shane on Shane crime on this show, Stephen. I like Beamer. I know he can be a bit much for some people, but I think he's a good coach. But I mean, if we're looking at it, there's not a lot of options here. Vanderbilt, that was a good one. Akron, I mean, come on. I'm looking ahead. If the season's in the toilet and we're not going to make a bowl game, or we need we need 2 wins to get there. This is every year it seems like with South Carolina. We just got to get the last 2 and we're making a bowl game. Well, what happens if you put all that focus, all that energy on Clemson, and then Wofford beats you? It would not be the first time South Carolina has lost a game like that. And I'm not picking on South Carolina because all these SEC. Heck, Nick Saban lost to ULM. You know what I mean? Like, these horrible losses happen. Give me Wofford for South Carolina. Am I crazy?
Wofford was 2-9 last year. So
I wanted to know that, but I'm sticking with it. I think Wofford's a trap game.
Mike, I think that what I'm getting at here is you have not been getting enough rest since you came back from SEC Media Day. So, in all seriousness, I think, to your point, I think there will be a lot of prep if you're South Carolina on Clemson a week after. And so if you're South Carolina, and this is kind of why one of the reasons why I looked at the Vanderbilt game, this stretch of games in October, it is Ole Miss at Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. South Carolina struggled so much with injuries and depth last year. How much does that stretch take a toll on this team before they go to a Vanderbilt or even Wofford on November 23rd? So I think, even though we like the way that Shane Beamer's teams have trended, if they want to get to a bowl game, whether it's Wofford or Vanderbilt, they cannot afford to overlook them, and also they have to avoid all the injuries that they had last season as well.
I think I'm just really enamored with that stupid Wolford logo. I mean, that's worth a win in my book. I'm just saying.
Terriers are great dogs, right?
All right, let's move on before I sound even dumber. How about Tennessee, Stephen? Where are you going for the Vols? And there's a couple good candidates here for Tennessee. Let's see, cousin Shane is going to get angry in the comments here.
I'm going back to the well. I'm gonna hang out in Fayetteville, I guess, for every trap game of the season. So give me Tennessee at Arkansas on October 5th. The timing here: Tennessee gets Oklahoma on the road September 21st, SEC opener. Then they get Arkansas. Looking ahead, Florida and Alabama, Kentucky. 3 huge games, kind of going to shape Tennessee's season. So I think at Arkansas. And it's early enough to where I would guess that Sam Pittman's probably the coach, even if things aren't going well. Give me Arkansas, October 5th.
Yeah, that's where I went as well, Stephen. I certainly considered Mississippi State if if things are breaking right, looking ahead to that huge showdown in Athens. I mean, you can't even call Florida a trap game because that's literally the biggest game on the schedule for a lot of these fans. NC State I kind of considered, but that's going to be one of the better games, I believe, on the week 2 schedule in the entire country. So, and I believe they'll both be ranked, barring some massive upset in the opener. So again, is that a trap game? I don't think so. I think the easy answer here is Arkansas for about the 20th. They only play 12 games, but I think we picked them trap game for about 20.
I'm afraid Arkansas might also be a pick for Texas here.
Yeah, I got a different one if you want me to go first. Let's do Texas here. Biggest trap game. Struggling to find a schedule here. Okay, here we go. Texas, biggest trap game. There's a couple. Yeah, Arkansas would make a lot of sense, Stephen, but I am seeing Kentucky. How about that? Right before Texas A&M. Again, I'm not the biggest believer in Kentucky, but there are some people like cousin Shane that think Kentucky's going to be really good this year. And if they are, I think these are the type of games, Stephen, where these Texas people are coming in here and they're saying, oh, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, win. I think these are all losable games for Texas. So give me Kentucky right before that huge showdown for A&M. Texas could be a loss away from getting eliminated from the college football playoff, and they may be thinking it's A&M while Kentucky trips them up here. Give me the Kentucky Wildcats.
A Stoops beating Texas. Wouldn't that be appropriate, right? Considering all the success that Bob had against the Longhorns. I to be honest with you, like that was the game that I had second because of the game against A&M coming up a week after. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I picked Arkansas just because the rivalry factor here for Arkansas. I mean, Arkansas could have a losing season. We don't know what Sam Pittman's status is going to be, but at the same time, we saw what happened the last time Texas went to Fayetteville. They ran into an absolute buzzsaw with the Razorbacks that night. So with everything at stake here for Texas, a very motivated Arkansas team at home with trying to pick off a massive rival, give them a warm welcome to the SEC. I went November 16th against Arkansas.
All right, Steven. So that's every team's trap games. We're going to do SEC bowl projections here in just a moment. But again, I asked you to come up with a list of non-conference games. Now, there's a lot of good non-conference games. I'm trying to look past those to a G5 upset potential. Just curious, how many games did you identify?
6.
Okay. Yeah. And any so let's just crack into it. You let me know the team, and I'll throw up the schedule.
I think there are 2 games on the Texas schedule that I have circled. Now, I do want to caution. I if you asked me to predict all of these, I would not pick a loss here. But I think let's kind of drill into some of these teams a little bit. August 31st, first game of the season for Texas, Colorado State. I am very high on Colorado State this year. I think they can be a sleeper team in the Mountain West. I think the one thing that would worry me about Colorado State if I'm Texas is they can score points. Torrey Horton is one of the best receivers in the country. Texas has some questions in the secondary coming into this year to see how it all fits together. So I think opener, if you're Texas, a quarterback and receiver combo that can stress your defense, that would worry me. Also, UTSA on September 14th. This is a team that lost their starting quarterback from last year, but the pieces around him are back on both sides of the ball. And also, it's a week after the Michigan game. So I think UTSA is a dangerous team in the AAC. Like I said, I don't think Texas loses, but I would circle those two games early in the year for Texas.
Yeah, I know Jeff Traylor. He was a hot candidate. I think he was may have even been on A&M's hot board there after they fired Jimbo. So I like that pick. All right, what team in the SEC is next, Steven?
Let's go to Alabama. 2 games early in the season. I circled August 31st, not necessarily as a game that's high profile, but I thought it was interesting that TJ Finley, the former LSU and Auburn quarterback, likely to be the starting quarterback for Western Kentucky on August 31st. Also, Western Kentucky, very high-powered offense. But the game that really caught my attention was September 7th against South Florida, because we saw what happened last year in a absolute rain-soaked environment in Tampa. South Florida gave Alabama a lot of trouble, and they are very dynamic on offense. Again, one of the best quarterbacks in the group of 5 in Byron Brown. Alex Golish, he was part of that coaching staff for Tennessee that torched Alabama's defense a few years ago. So I think South Florida, like I said, I wouldn't pick Alabama to lose here, but I think what we'll find out right away is where is Alabama's defense against a very good South Florida offense.
Could you see Alex Golish, if they have a good year, could you see him being a head coach in the SEC in the near future?
I think if you're Arkansas, wouldn't you have to give him a call, especially if he has a good year? Even Jeff Traylor, too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think both of those guys are definitely on the SEC radar.
I don't know if you caught this, but did you see what he said today when asked about having to play Alabama and Miami this year?
It's like they have to play South Florida, right?
Yeah. That's my kind of coach right there.
Yeah, they're going to score some points. They are going to be fun to watch. So if you're just looking for, maybe if you're playing on NCAA and you want a fun team to play with, or you want a team to root for outside the SEC, South Florida is going to be fun this year.
All right, so which SEC team we hit next with a challenging or potential upset non-conference?
We'll go back to Oklahoma. We talked a little bit about this early on. Tulane at Oklahoma. It's a week before the game against Tennessee. I think Tulane, much like South Florida, UTSA, they're among the favorites in the American Athletic Conference. I have Tulane's defensive line, linebackers, and defensive backs graded out among the best in the American Athletic Conference. So this defense is very good. And John Summerall, he's an SEC assistant. He certainly knows this league very well. A rising star, another coach who could be in the SEC in the next couple of years. I just think with Tennessee coming up and Oklahoma breaking in so much new offensively, that'll be a good test to see where Oklahoma is at that point.
Mm-hmm. So by my account, Steven, we got just one more left, right?
Actually, we should have 2. I erred in mentioning Western Kentucky at Alabama. So
okay,
sorry about that. That's my fault. But Mississippi State, September 14th against Toledo, kind of like we talked about earlier. Just so many unknowns for Mississippi State. Toledo, kind of the MAC, being a giant killer. A game Mississippi State cannot afford to lose if they want to go to a bowl game.
Yeah, no, certainly. That was chief among when I asked you to do this, I was thinking that would be one. So now we got one final one.
And it's one we mentioned on the Trap Games, Vanderbilt at Georgia State. Must win for Vanderbilt if they want to have any chance at getting to a bowl game. But also, this is the kind of some SEC ties here. I mentioned it. Dale McGee, Jim Chaney. There's a ton of new here for Georgia State. So if Vanderbilt loses this game, it's probably not going to go well for Clark Lee the rest of the year. That is a must-win game and sort of an upset situation to watch.
And take it from a Tennessee alum, Stephen, never take Georgia State lightly. Trust
True.
me on that one.
Yeah, that's a very memorable upset by the Panthers, and they have been sort of tricky at home. They played North Carolina in Atlanta recently and gave them a lot of trouble. So Del McGee, I think, will be a good hire for them, but a lot of transition this year too.
And then, so last thing, Stevens came prepared with some SEC bowl projections for the upcoming season. And again, Stephen, you'll have to let the audience know it's a little different than usual because we got the playoff, we got bye weeks, and things of that nature. So just kind of go into. I made a graphic for all this, but maybe you want to explain it before I just throw it at them.
Yeah. So just as a refresher, 12 teams will be in the playoff. The 5 highest conference champions will be granted automatic bids to the playoff. 7 at-large teams, and don't forget the silly seeding that occurs. Even if Texas is number 2 or number 3, they will be bumped down. The conference champions will get the 4 highest rated seeds. I know this is very difficult, but I think you'll like my predictions in the SEC for the playoff team.
And just taking that also into consideration, it's not like you can say Georgia's going to this bowl game and Texas going to that bowl game because of the seeding. It makes it difficult to project the game, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So seeding will come into play in the quarterfinals for bowl games, but also, they're going to try and keep it sort of traditional. So like the Big Ten team will go to the Rose Bowl, SEC team to the Sugar Bowl, but it's also a little jumbled too. Like depending on how this is seeded, where does the ACC champion fall? Where does the Big Ten champion fall? So it's a lot more tricky to project how this may look than ever before.
Right. I just wanted that to be clear, Stephen, before they start saying, well, where's the Sugar Bowl? Where's this bowl? Where's the Peach Bowl? All this. And before Missouri jumps on you, remember, he's at Big Orange Vols. Here's your SEC projections here, Stephen, for the SEC Bowl projections here. 4 SEC teams in the college football playoff. Why these 4?
So I think there are 4 teams that I feel good about and 3 or 4 that I have just on the edge of making the playoff. And some of this is kind of math when you start to kind of break down how many teams from the SEC could actually get in.
Mm-hmm.
What you're going to basically get 4 teams from outside the SEC will be guaranteed. Those are your 3 other conference champions plus a G5 team. Not to mention, I think you have to assume that the Big Ten's probably going to get 1, maybe 2 at-large teams. So the field of possibilities there for at-large in the SEC shrinks down. But, to look at this, I got Georgia as the best team in the country. I think Texas is, the runner-up, second in the SEC. Ole Miss and Alabama, I think very solidly top 10 teams. I have Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, just outside of that, with A&M and Oklahoma kind of in that next tier.
And I'll ask it for the audience, Stephen. Why do you hate Missouri?
I'm one of the highest, I should say, probably like one of the highest on Missouri outside of you this offseason. But yeah, they are literally like the last team out. And I think to kind of illustrate how important that opener is, A&M, Notre Dame, that game is going to play a huge role for A&M and Missouri, because think about how this could go. If A&M beats Notre Dame and Missouri beats A&M, and Notre Dame is very good, I mean, they could be top 10 to 15 good. That's going to look really good for Missouri later on down the season, kind of as a second order type victory. So Missouri is my last team out of these projections right now.
Yeah, interesting. So, and I have a feeling that LSU fans, they belong in the playoff. Tennessee, they're going to be mad because they got to face Iowa again in these bowl projections. Also, we got the Las Vegas Bowl, which is not annually SEC. It rotates back and forth, but yeah, some big time matchups here. But Missouri, Nebraska, and the Cheez It Bowl, or I guess it's Citrus Bowl. I never know what these stupid corporate logos. But uh, if this were to play out, and again, these are just bowl projections before a single game's been played. Any of these bowl matchups more appealing than others to you?
Mike, I think the one that jumps out is Missouri and Nebraska getting old Big 12, old rivals back together. I hated to project Tennessee and Iowa again in a bowl game. There's kind of it probably would take me more time to explain of like how the seeding process and sort of slotting these teams in. It's the way it had to fall, I think, to make other things work for Tennessee, and also to not give repeat matchups and repeat trips for some teams. So I would be really interested in Missouri and Nebraska. I think A&M and Arizona in the Vegas Bowl, and Oklahoma and Kansas could just be like turn on the bowl game and like 100 points could be scored because there's a ton of offense in both. And Auburn and West Virginia, like that's got interesting potential there in the Liberty Bowl.
Yeah. J.M. Jones says Mizzou ain't playing no GD Nebraska unless Nebraska wins the Big Ten. Oh, that's great. Bobby P says Tennessee plays Iowa every year at a bowl game. It certainly seems like that some ways or not. But yeah, this is certainly some interesting matchups. Florida, SMU, in the Gasparilla Bowl could be one. I think Auburn, West Virginia in the Liberty Bowl would be another good one. Anytime you get an SEC team in Vegas, is fascinating. Texas A&M, Arizona, South Carolina, Georgia Tech. So yeah, here's another takeaway. Again, people are going to criticize. They're going to complain, this, that, and the other. But you got South Carolina beating the odds for some people, making a bowl game, playing Georgia Tech. You got Florida making a bowl game to play SMU. Even Auburn. I know Auburn, they expect to make a bowl game at this point in time, but at least you're not saying these teams are going to underperform.
Yeah, I think one of my sort of preseason kind of takeaways every year is number one, and this is true like with all conference honors, is you can't get last year's stats. So you have to look at each season kind of in a vacuum and also sort of looking at history. But also we see this every year with teams that there will be a team or two that we can't predict or expect that the same path is going to be followed. You're going to expect an upset or two here and there. And that's kind of why I have South Carolina and Florida making a bowl. I just think they'll pick off an upset or two along the way and find a way to get to 6 victories.
And then one thing I wanted to ask you real quick here, Stephen, if as you projected here 4 SEC teams, who knows, could be 5 perhaps. I think that'd be pushing it, but let's say it is 4. And it doesn't really matter the 4, but you got Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss. Did you see Mike Elko at Media Days kind of say, so he favors the expanded playoff, more SEC teams, and he said, just look at baseball, to where apparently they expanded the field, and now we're getting SEC versus SEC championships, Final Fours. Could you see a scenario if 4 or more SEC teams make the playoff that? Now, certainly it wouldn't happen all the time, but where we would get 4 SEC teams in the Final Four, or maybe 2 in the Final Four, or even playing for the national championship. I guess basically what I'm asking you is, yeah, we'll have to get some other teams in there, but do you think the SEC will dominate it like they have the BCS and so on?
Absolutely. I think that this system, while it gives more access to teams, is going to favor teams like Alabama, like an Ole Miss, like a Texas. I mean, let's just use my rankings as an example. Texas will be seeded, 5th or 6th. And if they're seeded 5th, they're probably going to be playing Liberty, or they're going to be playing another G5 champ that they're going to be favored significantly. Then they could get the Big 12 champion, which could be ranked 15th in the country. So I think the path, while it is difficult and you're adding more variables to the season with injuries and other things, I'm thinking down the road here, and I think that the semifinals, it wouldn't shock me some years if you see 3 SEC teams in there and we get SEC versus SEC in the national championship game. That would not surprise me at all.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, Steven. So thank you for giving that up. I lobbed it up there and you slammed it out of the ballpark. But yeah, a lot of good ground covered on this episode, Steven. We got to hit on all 16 teams like we love to do. Any closing thoughts before we close this one out?
Absolutely. I would ask and appreciate anybody that goes out and buys the Athlon Sports Preview magazine. We've had a lot of great response so far. So please, if you haven't picked it up, athlonsports.com, your grocery store, your pharmacy store, Walgreens or wherever, Amazon, would really appreciate it if everybody picks a copy of that up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my go-to college football preview magazine. So, Steven, as always, can't thank you enough for all this insane knowledge that you drop on us on a weekly basis. Truly do appreciate each and every one of your appearances. I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out, and we'll catch you on the next one with Cousin Shane. I believe we'll see. We'll see if we can get him, but I think we can locate him. But that's gonna do it for this one. We'll catch you on the next one.